All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a legend, the Battle of Kursk. It's known as the greatest tank battle in history, but what if everything you think you know about it is a little off?
You know, this quote, it just nails it, doesn't it? It's that Hollywood image we all have in our heads. Dashing, dueling tanks. It sounds amazing. But the real story? Oh, it's way more complicated and honestly, way more fascinating. So let's dive into the legend first.
So here's the legend we're all familiar with, right? July 1943, Eastern Front. A massive, absolutely colossal clash of steel. We're talking thousands of tanks in one epic battle that supposedly decided the fate of the war.
And the numbers are just staggering. The legend says that at Prokhorovka, that's kind of the heart of the battle. You had 1,500, maybe even 2,000 tanks, all going at it at once. I mean, just try to picture that. And then there's this, the legendary 10-to-1 kill ratio. The story goes that for every single German tank knocked out, the Soviets lost 10. 10. This one number became the cornerstone of the whole myth about unbeatable German tanks.
Okay, but what if that's just not true? What if the legend is just that? A legend? What if the real story has been buried under decades of misunderstanding?
All right, let's start peeling this back. First things first, let's count the combatants. How many tanks were really on that field?
So when historians actually dug into the archives, a totally different picture emerged. The legend says 1,500 to 2,000. The reality? Closer to 910. Now don't get me wrong, that is still a huge number of tanks, but it's not even close to the myth.
Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting. It all comes down to one simple question. What does it mean to lose a tank? And believe me, this is where that whole 10-to-1 idea just completely falls apart. Now, what does it actually mean to lose a tank in battle? You'd think that's a simple question, but it's not. The answer is super complicated, and it really depends on who was doing the counting.
It boils down to two totally different ways of thinking. For the Germans, a tank wasn't a loss unless it was completely, utterly destroyed, like beyond repair. Why? Because they held the battlefield afterwards, so they could just tow away the damaged ones and fix them up. The Soviets, though, they had a different approach. Their factories were churning out new tanks, so if one was heavily damaged, they'd often just write it off. It's a classic case of apples and oranges. You're not even counting the same thing.
So to get a real, honest comparison, you have to change the rules. Historian Chris Lawrence did just that. He said, okay, let's forget about destroyed versus damaged. Let's just count every tank that was knocked out of the fight for any reason, completely destroyed, damaged to needing repairs, or even just broken down. That gives you a much better sense of what really happened that day.
And look at this. When you compare apples to apples like that, the numbers tell a completely different story. That mythical 10-to-1 ratio, it vanishes. The real ratio was about 1.61 to 1. So yes, the Germans still had an edge. They were knocking out more Soviet tanks than they were losing, but 1.6 to 1, that is a whole different ballgame from 10 to 1. But you know what? Even getting the tank numbers right is still missing the bigger picture. Because Kursk was never just about tanks. It was a massive, combined arms battle, and frankly, some of the other pieces on the board were just as important. Just think about this for a second. The very first day of the biggest tank battle in history, what's the first question Stalin asks his top general? Do we have control of the air? Not, how are our tanks doing, but how's the air war? That tells you everything you need to know about how crucial air power was.
And both sides brought their titans to the fight in the sky. You had the German Stuka dive bombers with these huge cannons strapped under their wings specifically to kill tanks. And on the other side, the Soviet Il-2 Sturmovik, the flying tank, this heavily armored beast designed for ground attack. The sky above Kursk was just as deadly as the ground below.
And the ground itself was a death trap. The Soviets had engineered the battlefield. We're talking massive minefields, designed to funnel German tanks right into prepared kill zones. Deep anti-tank ditches that could swallow a panzer whole. And get this, the highest concentration of anti-tank guns in history, all dug in, hidden, and waiting. The idea of tanks just dueling in an open field? No way. This was a meat grinder.
And this report from a Soviet tank unit says it all. Over Prokhorovka specifically, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, often ruled the skies. They were just hanging up there, raining down destruction on the Soviet tanks. Many of those tanks were destroyed from the air before they ever even saw a German tank on the ground.
Okay,
So the numbers are all wrong. The battle was way more than just tanks, which leads to the million-dollar question. Who really won at Kursk?
Well, it really depends on how you define victory. On a tactical level, for that one day, July 12th, you could say the Germans won. They inflicted heavier losses, and they held their ground. But on a strategic level, the big picture, it was a massive Soviet victory. For the first time in the war, they completely stopped a major German offensive dead in its tracks. The Germans didn't break through.
And you can't forget what else was happening in the world. Just as this meat grinder is happening at Kursk, the Allies land in Sicily. Hitler suddenly has a two-front problem again. His best armored forces are getting bled white in Russia, and now he needs them in Italy. He just couldn't sustain it, so he pulled the plug on the whole operation.
So, the Battle of Kursk wasn't that clean, epic duel of legend. It was brutal. It was complex. It was a grinding battle of attrition. And the victory wasn't about one tank being better than another. It was a victory of deep strategic defense, of a country's massive industrial power, and frankly, the unbelievable will to take hit after hit and still stop the enemy from advancing.
You know, the myth of Kursk is so powerful because it's a simple, clean story. But the reality, the messy, complicated reality, that teaches us something much more profound. It forces us to ask, how do the stories we tell about war shape how we even understand what it means to win? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.